All right, so welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out. There's lots of people in the seats. It's great to see for the vBrownBag stage. My name is Mike Preston. I'm a technical marketing engineer with Rubrik. Been there for about 4 months now, and prior to that I spent 12 years as a customer. So hopefully that kind of helps me relate to some of the challenges from IT operations and different things like that. Today, I kind of want to talk to you guys about Rubrik's amazing UI. Right? It's a really nice, clean interface, and hopefully, by the time I'm done, I can convince a few of you guys not to use it, if that makes any sense. So let's just jump right in. And this is sort of my way around not being able to do a demo, but there's going to be lots of crazy GIFs and things going up. This is Rubrik's UI, right? So it's a very intuitive, responsive, clean UI built off of HTML5. As you can see, there's not a lot of nerd knobs, right? Simplicity was really a key design center that we had when our founders took a look at the data protection landscape. They really looked at it and said, we have proxies and repositories and catalogs and all of these things, and it's really complex, right? Complex to set up, complex to maintain, complex to scale. So really what they did when they founded Rubrik was take all that complexity, all of those parts, the proxies, repositories, and converge it into software, right? A software fabric, a scale-out software fabric that runs, on-prem with our Brick appliance. It's a hyper-converged appliance. You can also run it as a virtual appliance or also in the cloud as well. The point is you get the same sort of look and feel no matter where it runs. You get this beautiful HTML5 UI. But this UI, is built on top of an even more powerful API layer, right? So you're going to see developer mode open up in Chrome here. And what I'm showing is, every single click, every single function, every single thing that you're doing within that Rubrik UI is simply just calling an API backend, right? And that API backend it's an open API spec, and it's available to everyone, right? So you can develop and script and do things around Rubrik. Which leads me to this, right? Why would we do something like this? So this is creating what we call an SLA domain, and that's really our data protection policy. And what that is it contains really 4 things. An RPO, right? How often you want to back up. Retention, how long you want to keep this stuff for. Archive, maybe after 30 days you want to ship that data off to, cheaper and deeper storage, whether that be, Amazon S3, Google Cloud, Azure, or on-prem NFS, right? And we also have a replication policy as well to handle things like DR. But the point is, why do we want to do something like this in the UI when we can do this, right? Since we do have that open API spec, we see a lot of development occurring, right? And one of them is our PowerShell module that we offer. And basically, you can do exactly the same thing, plug in those 8 numbers for your RPO and the archive and whatnot, with a little bit of PowerShell. So just for a couple more examples, right? The next step when you get Rubrik would really be to create those SLA policies and then assign a VM to that policy, right? Or assign what you want to back up to that policy. So you could be Sad Panda and you could go through and do it in the UI, that's okay. Or you could be Crazy Unicorn Panda here and you could just, one line of PowerShell and achieve the same thing. Second example, performing what we call a Rubrik live mount. This is the quickest way, along with instant recovery, to get back up and running with Rubrik, right? And what this does is essentially, rather than provision storage and copy the data from the Rubrik appliance back to your vSphere environment, what happens is the Rubrik appliance becomes an NFS data store, and your VMs get mounted and turned on right directly from the Rubrik appliance. Right, so essentially you can recover, as fast as it takes for that VM to boot. But again, why be Sad Panda and do this through the UI, when you can be Dabbing Panda and do it through PowerShell as well. And these examples are small, right? I get it. It's probably not something you're going to automate, like doing a recovery. It doesn't really make sense. You're probably going to go into the UI to do that. But why I'm really showing this is because as you start to look at all the corners of the data center and integrate different things, with Rubrik technology, you can really come up with a few, unique use cases. Right, and here's number 1. As a customer, I looked after a lot of SQL databases, right? So I did a lot of DBCC check DBs, right? And we all know that they're a little I/O intensive on the storage as well as the SQL server. So why not, integrate Rubrik live mount functionality and integrate, the PowerShell for SQL Server and kind of combine these two together, right? And this is just a bunch of code. It's nothing really special, but it's basically just grabbing, a backup of a SQL database, live mounting it to a SQL Server, and then spawning off that health check on that live mount. So all of a sudden, all that storage I/O isn't being processed on your production database, but you're actually processing that on, the Rubrik appliance instead. So use case number 2, VM provisioning, right? And I was a vSphere administrator as well as a SQL administrator. It's kind of the jack of all trades type position, but this scenario came up more than once where someone would come up to me and say, hey, I really need you to restore VM2. And I'm like, I never even heard of VM2, right? Like people create these VMs, they don't really tell us about them, right? So why not build, that protection right into your provisioning process, right? And this just simply goes up and creates a new VM with the PowerCLI modules and then calls off on the APIs to Rubrik to add it to an SLA. Now you can see that around line 20 there's an invoke web request, and that's just because we don't have the ability yet to refresh vCenter with the Rubrik PowerShell module. But we can just make those raw API calls out to the Rubrik APIs. So what if PowerShell's not your thing, right? Maybe we all don't really love PowerShell, right? The thing is, the APIs, they're wide open, right? So you use whatever you want. Most scripting tools now are going to support, connecting into a RESTful API and consuming that. So go ahead and use C# or Python or curl, whatever it is you guys want to use, whatever existing tools you have, go ahead and get that Rubrik integration with that. Or better yet, use some of our supported stuff that we already have built, right? If you're a ServiceNow customer, we pipe all that Rubrik functionality into ServiceNow. We also have a VRO package. So if you like vRealize Orchestrator like me, you can install that and build that VM provisioning workflow, pipe that up to vRealize automation if you want to, put that in your self-service catalog and go from there. As well as we have, an amazing team of rangers and engineers that have, a lot of different code on GitHub for things like Ansible and Chef and SaltStack and all of this crazy stuff that's out right now for infrastructure as code and things like that. So go ahead and utilize that. And so you might say, how do I get started, right? And I've been consuming APIs for a little while now, and honestly, step 1, read the documentation. That's the hardest step. It's hard to find the documentation, right? I've done a lot of work with Google APIs, and there's different versions and different things like that. You're on different websites, and they're saying this is depreciated. The Rubrik documentation, it comes right on the appliance. It's built right into the software. So as you get updates and different things like that, move to different versions, the documentation also gets updated. So if you just go to /docs/v1 on the Rubrik appliance, you'll get all this documentation. It is very, very concise and very, very thorough. If you spend a half an hour reading the introduction section and taking a look at some of the resources, you should be well on your way. There's lots of sample code and different things like that. But if that's not enough, go ahead and practice. We also have a playground where you can get in and you can actually start executing API calls against your production environment, your production Rubrik environment. And this is really, really handy if you're like me and you kind of wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, like dreaming about JSON and squiggly brackets and all this crazy stuff, because a lot of times it's hard to form the actual JSON you need. And this will allow you to actually execute those API calls, see what the body request is going to look like, see what your response request is going to look like, and copy and paste that into the scripts that you have. So at the end of the day, really the choice is yours. Go ahead and use our world-class UI. It's a great UI. It's fun to click around in it and do different things like that. But take advantage of the open APIs that we offer, because we have some customers that honestly I'm not even sure if they've logged into the UI. There's some case studies on our website where they've just basically purchased Rubrik to integrate into their already provisioning processes, and it's a great tool. It's great to have that, and it's great to be able to integrate that into what you already have. So with that, that's all I have for today. So thank you. Is there questions? We've got time for questions, I think.